there's just not that many people thinking about pet products that much. Like it's kind of how we've differentiated ourselves. And a lot of that came from, being inspired by brands like Arc'teryx or Lululemon and just this like, let's just care 10% more, 20% more, because most people care 20% less. So now you're basically caring 40% more than the next guy.
Hi guys, Kevin Newsom here with Triple Whale. I'm the head of community guy, and one of the really fun parts about my gig is that I get to sit down every now and again with people who are doing really interesting things in entrepreneurship, and we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and a lot of these guys end up having really interesting stories about why they get into doing what they're doing, and one of these stories that caught my eye was with our guest today, who's Sam Alter from Atlas Pet Company. First of all, Sam, let me just take a beat here and say thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So take me back, if you don't mind. I'm struck by a bunch of things that have kind of brought you to this point, and just in knowing what I know. But it sounds like that's not there. I mean, the story itself is pretty intricate and also pretty powerful. Like, what was going on in your life when you considered starting your own thing here?
Yeah, so I guess it's a bit dramatic of a start, but I had gone through kind of a pretty rough few years. Three of my closest friends died before I turned 25, all through kind of crazy things like a motorcycle accident, overdose, suicide. And essentially, I realized pretty young that this whole like work forever and enjoy retirement, later idea wasn't potentially going to work out for me because the people I felt the closest to didn't have that opportunity. And so it really kind of changed the way I thought about what I'm going to do in life, how I want to work on my career, and like what's the end goal, which is hopefully to have more time with my family and less of a requirement to be working as much. And so with that kind of in mind, I was working in a job that I didn't like and going through a pretty rough breakup. And so I wanted something I had a little bit more control of and was spending every day with my dog. And so this thing that I use at least 2 or 3 times a day, the dog leash, felt like something that hadn't really been considered for a while. It had been built mostly overseas and nobody really created like a great one. And it felt like if I could do this from my apartment, it would be something that I could actually care a lot about and differentiate from some of the like older players who traditionally sold through retail, because I was able to work with Instagram, Facebook targeting to get right in front of the exact customer that I thought would be interested in this kind of thing. So a lot of it was like, what could I do for my apartment that didn't have this huge upfront cost and like, needing tooling and things like that, but I could kind of buy parts off the shelf, assemble them into a product that I'm adding value through that assembly, and then positioning it in a way that lets me use a product designed for something like rock climbing to turn it into something for dogs where there's a little bit kind of a different market, but it values the attention to detail and quality that, we had.
Interesting. That's really cool. Well, a lot of times when I talk to not necessarily pet related entrepreneurs, but even just pet owners, it's like, I feel like the stories that if you pull on that string, it's like the stories that end up bubbling up out of those conversations. A lot are like, well, this is kind of what my pet's personality was like. And so that led us to, X, Y, or Z. And Atlas is also the name of your dog, right?
Yeah, so Atlas is the black lab that's kind of all over the website, but I had him for about 2 years when I started the business. I was actually posting a daily photo of him on Instagram, and it was just called Atlas Daily, mostly for my own, like, I wanted kind of a historical reference of him growing up as a puppy and didn't want to cover my own feed with that. So started Atlas Daily around that idea, and then that's kind of what we launched Atlas Pet Company out of. So I posted a photo of the first dog leash I made just on the feed and said, anybody interested? And yeah, we were able to sell like, I think 15 of them in the first couple of weeks. And so that let me kind of validate it and then start putting some money behind the ad spend and things like that. But yeah, my dog's name is Atlas and he's the kind of face of the brand. I'd say a lot of this also started because I wanted to kind of like hide behind him, where like one of the original goals of the business was being able to write off a camera and laptop. And if I could do that, I'd feel like, hey, this is a, time well spent. So yeah, a lot of it was around taking photos of my dog, and he's a pretty good looking black lab. So kind of hid behind him and created a bit more of the, like, he's the ideal customer in my mind. And yeah, we've been on a lot of adventures and tested the gear pretty thoroughly. But I would say kind of the two of us, we call ourselves the co-founders.
Now it sounds like if I'm here reading between the lines here, like it sounds like there are a couple of things that happen. One is like you, if I'm hearing this correctly, like you DIY'd your first products. Like, did you have experience in that area when you got started, or what kind of? I mean, obviously you're like working toward a means to an end, but like tell me about like spinning that up and figuring out how to put this stuff together.
Yeah, so yeah, it was definitely not anything I had experience in before. All of my experience was way more on the digital and like marketing side. And so what I wanted to do was buy a product, like I said, to assemble more than manufacture. So in my mind, that's like buying off the shelf parts like the climbing rope and the rope clamps and then a steel clip, and then cutting down the rope, putting it all together, and like what would have been seen as 40 sections of a $300 rope are now being sold as $50 dog leashes. And so a lot of it came back to, yeah, what can I start to kind of validate the idea as cheaply and easily as possible? And then as I grow, like even the climbing rope thing, I had no idea how small the climbing rope market is. So we quickly became the largest buyer of climbing rope in America because nobody's buying that much rope brand new to cut down. And so climbing rope ended up being this thing that we had to go get custom made for us by the actual inventors of climbing rope in Germany, just because we were buying all the rope on the market, and things like color changes every season were pretty frustrating. So having a bit more control over the product by getting it made for us helped. But yeah, a lot of it was like, what can I do that's not actually like buying a minimum order quantity of anything or getting tooling made, but like just validating this idea, and as the thing grows, I'll be able to kind of expand from there. But even the climbing rope, there's kind of inherent things that make it difficult to work with. So it's typically not sold on a spool. It's sold flaked out for climbing purposes. And so even cutting it, like we had to train everybody how to hold climbing rope and deal with it. And then like they mark all the centers of the rope so that you know where the point is on the wall. But that means like we'd be cutting a bunch of leashes, and then halfway through a leash, you get a big black mark in the middle of it. So things like that
Right.
make climbing rope like really inconvenient to work with, which frankly was like a bit of a moat for us because other people weren't going to lean on that type of product. They'd find something cheaper and easier. So yeah, I was like, what can I do that's like starting small and I can grow from there? And climbing rope was kind of the first thing. But now that we've bought some sewing machines and have a bit more of a facility to keep everything in, we're able to kind of expand the product line through sewing and fabrics and things that I don't have to invent the tooling for, but we can kind of buy products and assemble them still.
Oh, nice. Well, and it still sounds like there's a lot of like TLC that goes into your approach. So that's huge, huge. What the other question I was going to ask you, like what typically like those first 15 customers that you guys got, obviously like as you're figuring out stuff like, okay, how do we mark off this rope in order to cut it exactly the right way to make sure that we get the end product that we want? What did you learn from those early customers in terms of like how your stuff was landing with them and what they needed and how their pets felt about it?
Yeah, good question. I think the like one part we maybe have missed is the biggest differentiator on our business is our warranty, and so a lot of it is this guaranteed for life, even if your dog chews through it, where it's not necessarily because of our products like being defective, but their dog just is a chewing puppy, and so it chewed through the leash. And we've designed them in a way that lets us replace the rope and keep the rest of the materials. So a lot of it was trying to educate customers around like what this type of warranty meant and what like a repair process was. And it wasn't just sending out new products, but having them send it in, we'd fix it up and then send it back. And so I'd say that like first 15 customers was really trying to like understand how that worked for them, and like if it was something they were actually interested in or if they just cared about the quality of the product. And it did turn out that a lot of these people were buying like 4 or 5 other leashes and their dog's chewing through them in a month. So they're spending, 60 to $75 a year on dog leashes. And if they could just have one for the rest of their life, it would be not just like a better thing for the environment and not throwing things away all the time, but they'd feel better about not having to buy something every 2 months with the dog chewing through it.
It totally makes sense. I mean, I guess the other thing that occurs to me, and definitely know this a lot better than I do, but it feels like, so I had a lab mix for 16 years, and that dog was a puppy for 13 years and an old lady for 3, and there was no in between. And I feel like with certain breeds, they're just some of them tend to be chewier and harder on that kind of material than others. So have
Yeah.
you guys learned anything else in that area, just about how you customize it or how you know make it tougher on those guys?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes back to like as we've expanded our product line, we can't make everything as durable as maybe our first products, but we still have the same warranty. So it's about understanding how to repair items in a way that's like not just throwing it away, but able to fix it. But I'd say the second part of it is that those customers that have the extra chewy dogs, like if they're going to send in their leash 5 times, that's a really strong relationship that we have with them at this point. And I'd say that every
Right.
time they send it back helps to build that relationship because it's something unique. You know, you can't really send dog products back to Vietnam and have them get fixed up. So being able to send it in or even now drop it off at the warehouse and get it fixed up in the same day, there's a lot of kind of value in that to the person seeing the shop, seeing the people behind it, not feeling like it's just a online brand anymore. And I think a lot of that comes back to when I traveled a lot before I got my dog. You would go to a place like, you know, the Guinness Brewery in Dublin, and you become a little bit more interested in the brand after you've seen the brewery, even if you never liked Guinness, because it's seeing kind of behind the scenes and seeing into the kitchen sort of thing of these bigger brands that feel like the brand has become just so, yeah, like synonymous with a stout that Guinness kind of created that. And so even locally in Golden, we've got Coors Brewery here. So it's all the Coors in the world are made right here. And going through that factory, you're a little bit more passionate about Coors, which is it's an okay beer. It's not the best beer, but
Right.
going to see it firsthand just builds that kind of like appreciation for the brand, appreciation for having been there. And the customers that are sending in a few times, they actually become some of our best customers because they're pretty bought into the whole idea of American made and being able to repair your gear.
And to that end, how is COVID for you guys? Because I feel like the story that I kind of hear repeated from time to time is like, okay, the bottom drops out in early 2020, and then you're contingent upon what your business is. The public panic reacts, and you have either an amazing 2020 or a really tough one. And then sometimes for folks who had a really amazing 2020, 2021 was something different altogether. How has it been for you guys? Because I would almost think, this is just me guessing here, but I would almost think that like if you can't get together with people, your bond and your relationship with your animal family becomes even more important.
Totally. And I think with COVID, there was just so much happening that kind of was strong tailwinds behind us. And a lot of it felt a little bit more obvious to other people after 2020 that like dogs and e-commerce and people caring about their dogs more than ever before would be kind of obvious. But I will say a lot of it had to do with kind of like building the foundation for a few years before that happened, having even the warehouse to fulfill all the orders, having the suppliers to source products from, and not like cardboard boxes of finished goods, but actual like raw materials. So we're able to build everything in-house still. That became a bit of an advantage because as other people are waiting on containers full of all their products, we're able to be a lot more flexible with the materials we have to make exactly what customers are ordering. And then on top of that, like a lot of the customer reviews, the SEO, the just website presence, when you weren't able to go to a PetSmart and buy everything at once, you're typically not going to search cheapest dog leash after buying a $5,000 golden doodle. You're going to search for the best dog leash. And even the people that are going to the dog shelter and adopting dogs and bringing them home, because a lot of the shelters kind of emptied out around the country, they want to buy things that they will care about and things that will last a little bit longer and have a bit more of a story behind. And so a lot of it was kind of the 4 years leading up to that and then being in the right spot at the right time, I'd say. And even from like a operational standpoint, a lot of the 3 years before COVID were me living in my apartment and then me running the business from a Sprinter van. So even like starting this business back in 2015, a lot of it was around like, how can I create a job that will pay me essentially San Francisco wages anywhere in the country? And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so it kind of created that like threshold of what I would have to like break to quit my real job. But anyway, so a lot of it was around being able to write off the van so I could move into the van and not have to pay myself, but have the business cover that. And so that trip started July 2018. And then we were actually up in Whistler in March 2020 when the whole thing started getting a little bit more serious. And we started hearing about the border closing and just general, like, when you're living on the road and the Starbucks close and the gyms close, you have a bit more drastic situation than when you're living at home and you have all those facilities kind of right there. So we basically drove straight back and already had the warehouse set up from a few months prior, basically just kind of before the winter had started. So we already had a few people in place in the facility to receive materials to and build up the products. So it was kind of like the perfect timing around not just being in a van before like van life exploded. And now it's probably pretty hard to find a campsite in the places that we were, but being able to kind of like put that chapter behind me and say that I scratched that itch and now we could kind of keep our heads down and work on the business. And then with COVID, because of the way that Amazon was able to stay open and manufacturers were able to keep their facilities running, we actually weren't working from home for more than a couple of weeks. We were able to come in and get kind of an exemption because of the way that we're a manufacturing facility. So a lot of that helped so that we weren't kind of like arguing with our spouses at the apartment, both working from home and all that. Like it helped to, I think after living in 100 square feet, being able to take a bit of a like space break from your spouse was pretty nice, and kind of have everything be in the warehouse so I could not have to bring it home again.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Well, and I guess a couple of things. One being that I can imagine when you are, well, let me just back up. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was like, a lot of times when we have these conversations, we're talking about your journey as an entrepreneur and your company's journey, but you also like, and you touched on that a little bit here, like you also took a literal journey. Like if you look at your website, it's got this red line that basically just canvases just giant donuts around North America. You guys have seen a lot of the country, and regardless of whether you saw it before or during or after the some of the weird shutdown stuff, what'd you guys learn from just being on the road and meeting people and being in different places? I mean, are dog people the same everywhere?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we didn't quite realize before leaving on the road was kind of having that foundation of customers around the country let us be in cities like Chicago and have somebody to reach out to and be like, hey, we're in town. Do you have any recommendations on where we should hang out with our dog or where we should maybe sleep for the night? And the amount of people that literally offered us to stay on their driveway or even sleep in their homes, like it was actually more comfortable typically to stay in the van than like try to go into their homes. But it was just incredible how many people were willing to offer their place for us to sleep and have kind of that community already together. And then just recognizing how like it's a weird filter, but when people take care of their dogs and have kind of become obsessed with their dogs, we're probably going to get along. And so when we're in these places that are fairly middle of nowhere or even denser cities, and you're able to connect with people and just kind of really hit it off out of the gate, it was such a special experience. I think especially after leaving San Francisco, I felt like I'd met some of the smartest, most motivated people I'd ever be around. And then you kind of see the complete other side of like what people have prioritized and how they're spending time outdoors with their dogs, living on the road. You meet a lot of people that are just not really interested in working that much and trying to like have a more fulfilling life for themselves. And it has kind of nothing to do with money. And that's kind of the total opposite of what you'll find in Silicon Valley sometimes. So I'd say it was a great kind of refresh into, getting back to my roots. I think growing up mountain biking and skiing a lot, I was always outdoors, but I was living in the city working a lot. So it's great to kind of get back to nature and meet so many incredible people. And people were so welcoming when we were around the country. It was just surreal. And even there's a story where we were in the middle of Monument Valley taking photos. Monument Valley is like where Forrest Gump turned around in the middle of his run, but it's absolutely one of the most remote rural places I've ever been. And we're just taking photos in the middle of the road. And literally this woman that's pulled over on the side rolls down her window and she's like, Sam, Atlas, it's Alex. Alex from Canada. And I'm like, what, who are, and she was this ambassador that we had sent gear to like 2 years before. And her dog is there with our products, like literally on the side of the road in Monument Valley. It was just this like, what a small world, like what a crazy like
Seriously.
interaction. And so I think what's hard to remember when you're doing so much online is like, it's not easy to get products from my warehouse to the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. But the USPS has been able to make that happen and then make people in Arkansas feel like they can finally get products that maybe their local pet store or Walmart would never have sold. And so able to like kind of really connect with our audience around the country in a way that we couldn't ever do before Instagram and e-commerce. So it really felt like that combined with just having like an actual relationship with our customers, not selling through retailers and distributors, totally changed how that year went because so many people were so welcoming.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I can only imagine if I'm that ambassador who clearly is already bought into what you guys are doing and then just total rando situation runs into you guys in real life. Like that's got to be that's um, a solder iron of loyalty moment right there. So that's how
Totally.
exciting. Cool. This is a little bit of a cliche thing, but it's like I can't not ask because I'm always curious. Like, what do you wish you knew at the beginning that now you're pretty comfortable saying, like, okay, well, if we knew that, maybe we would have done X differently or Y differently, besides marking off the leash stuff?
Yeah. So things that we would have done differently, I would say, not to say that we haven't made a lot of mistakes. I would say the biggest thing that we realized is like climbing rope, which was the kind of foundation of our products at the beginning, was a product that's really difficult to manage, really difficult to buy, and really difficult to like, work with on a regular basis. I think it's things like that when you're making 20 leashes, it's a problem. When you're making 50 leashes, you might think it's a problem. When you've made like 20,000, it's just a whole different thing. And recognizing that, yeah, we probably did something harder than it needed to be, but ultimately that level of like, whatever, it's the right material and we're going to make the best product possible, it paid off. And it's something that we've actually been able to fix just because the way that we're buying our own custom rope now, and it's still real climbing rope. But yeah, I would say the climbing rope material decision was fascinating. Knowing that we'd become the biggest buyer, I just had no idea. And then the second part was like managing all of the operations in house, from manufacturing to fulfillment and just repairs and returns and all of that. Like I'd say it was nice that we could grow slower and not have like this VC backed push that just kills all these processes. But the way you organize your warehouse, the way you organize processes around what you make, it's taken us a few years to figure out. And I'm glad that we had those few years before kind of COVID kicked up the requirements a little bit and volume just kind of took off, because that like slow and steady approach to building that foundational operational stuff helped so much, because it's things that when you're repeating them 20,000 times over, they just add up so quick, and you just have a hard time understanding that volume and scale when you're kind of doing everything yourself. I would say like the best kind of quantifiable example is when we started the business and cutting the rope and the clamps. Like I could not make more than 6 leashes an hour. But once we started making our own clamps, where the little plastic piece that you see on all the rope stuff, what happened was I got a call from the person I was buying them from saying they were retiring, shutting it down. And I just spent 3 years building the business around this piece. And so I basically had to come up with my own design and get design files for it and start injection molding that new piece. And with that, I didn't really expect a big change in production efficiency, but we were able to go from 6 leashes to 15 leashes an hour. And then with the jig, now that we owned the clamp and it wasn't somebody else's tooling, like we could invest into the jig, that brought us from 15 leashes an hour to 45 leashes an hour. And that meant that I'm not hiring 4 employees to do, what we used to be able to do. Before, we could just have the same person building more volume. And I think it was little tweaks like that if we had to figure it out while we were growing so fast, it would have been much more difficult. And like being able to figure it out kind of slower over time was super beneficial.
Well, and I feel like a couple of the articles that I have read about you guys have been specific, not necessarily to the leashes, but it seems like the harness is getting a lot of love. Like, what, like in general, is that your, is that kind of your flagship, or are you guys still leading with what you were originally making?
Well, so the leash and collar were the two things that kind of started it out, and then the harness came next. But the harness and leash are still our top sellers. The harness is second to the leash, but the harness I think works really well. Like functionally, it's just a lot better than what else is on the market, mostly because of the way that we get really close to the hardware when we're sewing. So it's just taking that little extra care when we're making the products instead of like, you know, a half inch allowance for the seams. We're doing everything with an eighth inch. And so things that Chinese factories just don't really care about the tolerances and they think about it as, not really that important. We took the complete other approach and said, let's like really focus on all these little things. But the harness has also become really valuable to people because of the way it's a no pull harness, and the dogs that are just so rambunctious, constantly pulling. If you're a 65, 75-year-old person with a young Aussie, you can put our harness on them and have them stop pulling you like you would experience with most other products. And it's this just immediate value that you get as soon as it's on. But a lot of that comes from making it really easy to put on, using a really nice buckle that, frankly costs $4 instead of 40 cents. So it's the one piece that the human touches is actually going to be significantly better than anything else that you're used to. So it's just really easy to put on. It solves the problem of your dog pulling pretty much immediately. And it's things like that where it's just a little bit more thought out design to make it as easy to use and beneficial once you are using it. There's just not that many people thinking about pet products that much. Like, it's kind of how we differentiate ourselves. And a lot of that came from, being inspired by brands like Arc'teryx or Lululemon, and just this, like, let's just care 10% more, 20% more, because most people care 20% less. So now you're basically caring 40% more than the next guy.
Well, and if you cared 40% more, I mean, my personal philosophy is your audience is smart enough to tell the difference. So it's like if you guys are really walking the walk and talking the talk, and the products feel like you put some extra TLC in there, you're, that maybe your ambassador doesn't stop and high five you guys under other conditions. So that's it's exciting. Cool. Well, I guess a couple more things here. One, you touched a little bit on some of the other businesses that maybe have inspired you guys. You've also talked a little bit about kind of your approach to social and sort of the organic way that you were originally kind of getting out there. And it sounds like that really resonated with folks who love your products. We don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but I am curious, like, what channels have been working for you? It sounds like you guys still probably, I'm guessing, have an Insta presence, and what's your media playground?
Yeah, so Instagram has always been really important to us. I'd say a lot of that changed a little bit more. Well, it first changed as soon as we started putting money towards the ad side of it, and all of our organic basically just stopped overnight, which was, sort of obvious after the fact. But it's this, once you've told Facebook that you have money to spend, your organic reach doesn't really happen anymore. And so that was the first surprise. But then after the iOS changes, and frankly, the reason we even found Triple Whale in the first place was trying to solve that attribution problem. And a lot of it was around like Facebook just being less valuable to us because the way you couldn't find that perfect target customer anymore. But I will say that the like social presence and the story of Alice and I on the road, and even the adventures that we go on now, it helps to kind of tie it all together. And we still see the social page as kind of our like brand side outside of the website, versus like Google search is just way more like conversion optimization versus the like brand fluffy stuff that you'll see on Instagram. And so it's kind of understanding that balance and realizing that like Google has so much more intent. So like best dog leash as a search, versus with Instagram and Facebook, you're doing more of the target yoga people that like the outdoors and go camping and have a high purchase behavior. It's just way more like the type of person you want to be in front of, not the person that actually needs the solution right then. So as Facebook's become less powerful, we've shifted more of the money there towards retargeting, and Google as kind of the main top of funnel. And then organic is kind of the thing that ties it all together as, things to create the brand. And then we've obviously started expanding into TikTok and things like Pinterest over the last year or two. But I will say that most of it comes back to Google, driving top of funnel, Facebook ads at the middle of the funnel, and then a lot of Klaviyo and email flows to bring customers back and keep them engaged with the brand through blogs and things like that. But yeah, I would say it's those kind of, it's always going to be a mix, but right now it's primarily Google at the top and then email at the bottom.
Makes sense. Sounds like it's working for you guys. I get, and you touched a little bit on the fact that like when you guys were out on the road, there's some evidence of the community that you're building up just by virtue of the fact that people were opening up their homes or like giving you guys directions on and insight into the places that you should visit or hang out or spend your time while you're in their neck of the woods. Have you guys done anything on the community side with regard to like getting your people together when you're in town beyond some of the things that you were talking about with meeting individual, the families and the pups who are out there using your products?
Yeah, especially now that COVID's kind of a little bit more contained and feeling like
fingers
exactly. But it was kind of this interesting thing, and we finally had a facility to have people come to, but we couldn't have anybody show up because of COVID for 2 years. And so now we have like the in-person retail area and also just a place for you to drop off returns and repairs and stuff like that. But I will say that being grounded in a single place has been easier to build out more of those community efforts. So we did this event with the city of Golden a few months ago called Goldens in Golden. It was the largest golden retriever meetup in the country with over like 3,000 golden retrievers, but right in our backyard, right? So it was a perfect sort of way to get in front of our community, but also Kong, which is a huge dog toy manufacturer, is also here in Golden. Mm-hmm. So the two of us basically were the two brands there at the event and helping to take photos with dogs in front of a sign and just introduce our products and kind of be a face in the community then. But after that event, we've started doing smaller events with the local, like even Arc'teryx, Colorado. We did a Puffies and Puppies meetup where they're going to clean your puffy jacket and we're going to sell you a dog leash at a brewery. But a lot of it was around like, how do we have the like stability to reach out and work with people? Because on the road, we weren't staying in places very long. That's one thing when you're sleeping in your car that you can't really like camp out for a week on the street. So we had a bit more of a like timeline issue, and we try to do a meetup in major cities, and some of them worked out really well, but it is just this interesting thing of like, you want to meet the community. It's kind of easier one-off than having 10 people with all their dogs show up and then they want to tour the van all at once, and it's a very small space. So it's kind of nice to meet them in a bigger environment and then kind of have better relationships with them individually.
Well, there's also something to be said too for like the quality of the interaction, like what you were saying, like with if you have limited space in the van, or if you guys are just, you've been on the road for 3 days and you have limited bandwidth or you're a little bit worn out, like just being able to really connect with people. And it sounds like you guys have put a premium on not just that, but also their furry friends. And then I guess the last question that I have for you, Sam, like what's next for you guys? Where are you going? Company, van, whichever.
Well, unfortunately, we had to sell the van. Not unfortunately, but like that was all part of the plan. So I would love to get another one eventually. That's definitely not off the books. But I will say that the next kind of push for us and what we've been working on over the last 6 to 9 months is really just expanding the product line. A lot of the business was built around trying to keep it as simple as possible while we knew we'd be moving into the van and kind of like having somebody in North Carolina making this stuff and somebody else shipping it. Like we didn't want a really complex product line with a bunch of SKUs. And now that we have the space, the inventory, like organization and just the manufacturing resources to build more products, we're trying to expand the product line and reach new categories of dogs. So when most of the products are built around my 80-pound Labrador, but a lot of our customers are living in cities like New York and Chicago, they typically don't have a big dog like that. And so trying to cater more towards the smaller dog market and more of the fashion dog thing where we just release bandanas and it's a little bit more of the, like non-utilitarian, but more just want to make my pup look cute. Things like that we couldn't really have competed on early on, but now that we've built up the brand and the reputation, it's easier to launch new products to those existing audiences. And I think just a lot of that comes back to wanting to build a few great products, not like 30 different types of leashes, but having still a kind of smaller collection of items that we care a little bit more about, and understanding like what other problems we can solve. So when we've solved a lot of problems for bigger dogs, how do we kind of take that same approach and help the smaller dogs that we haven't really been able to create products for? But I would say those are kind of the next two big pushes.
Super exciting. But tell us where we can find you. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so atlaspetcompany.com is the website, and the Instagram is Atlas Pet Company. That's pretty much the handle everywhere, just Atlas, ATLAS Pet Company. And yeah, would love to have anybody from the Triple Whale community reach out. It's been one of the best e-commerce groups that I've been in. So yeah, awesome. Really excited to be a part of this.
Well, and thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us. This has been a lot of fun, super educational. I have a feeling at some point either my dog is going to behave better or look better or both. So I'm a fan of that possibility. But Sam, we'll be rooting for you and really appreciate you taking a few minutes with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.